There needs to be a wider international debate as to what constitutes an attack. I mean, is this, if we can prove that this is a hostile state in the form of China, does that constitute Article 5 of the NATO convention?
Back in this country, MPs are being briefed about a cyber attack which was able to access the names and bank details of thousands of British soldiers, sailors and pilots. Now, China has been blamed for the attack, which affected up to 270,000 members of the military personnel, but denied involvement.
Relevant remarks of the UK politicians are absurd. China firmly opposes and fights all forms of cyber attacks. We also firmly reject using the cybersecurity issue politically to smear and vilify other countries.
Well, let's talk now to Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP for Bournemouth East and former chair of the House of Commons Defence Select Committee. Good afternoon, Mr. Ellwood.
Good afternoon to you.
How serious do you believe this to be?
I think this is a wake-up call. It does have all the hallmarks of a hostile state attack. It illustrates how the character of conflict is changing with the digital terrain now as important as the physical. And of course, it's easy to access. You can do so from anywhere in the world, very cost effective. And as we're seeing play out, you've just read, very easy to deny. The government's done a lot of work to increase its cyber resilience across Whitehall. I understand this was to do with a third party, a contractor. And I'm sure some of those questions will be posed to Grant Shapps as to where we go from here. But certainly the targeting of bank details is probably designed to see who could potentially be coerced or bribed, perhaps unaware who the state actor is behind this. And as I say, it's a reminder just where warfare or conflict is actually going. There are no clear rules of engagement relating to this sort of conflict. All the Geneva Conventions were written to do with physical warfare, military might either side of a deliberate line. So we do need to look at the bigger picture here. How do you proportionately respond to this? If we can confirm this is China, how do we react? Who do we even go to ask for some form of punishment, some form of recognition that this is actually taking place?
I mean, it is such a question for our times, isn't it? Because if you think about other physical wars that are going on in the world at the moment, we can have quite a logical conversation, as distasteful as that might be, about lives that are lost, about military equipment that is being used, about levels of aggression. But I don't think we, just as punters, really know the language that we should be using about a cyber attack. Do you?
No, exactly. There needs to be a wider international debate as to what constitutes an attack. I mean, is this, if we can prove that this is a hostile state in the form of China, does that constitute Article 5 of the NATO convention? These are very, very difficult questions. But as I stress, this is where the world is going. It's far easier to do this from afar. And a country like China that doesn't want direct military conflict, it's growing its military, Army, Air Force, Navy, they're now the largest in the world. But it wants to be able to do this from afar, at its own pace, to coerce nations through its One Belt, One Road program. It's essentially got a very different interpretation of our international rules-based order. And this is a very clever way of causing economic harm, sowing political discord by interfering with what's going on directly in our country. It's what everybody's talking about here in Parliament today.
Sure. So at the moment, would it be right to say that we believe that we should stay on a moral high ground and we shouldn't really be entertaining the thought of a cyber attack on another country, but that might change if we need to retaliate, if we need to show our kind of might to protect ourselves? Is that what we're planning?
Well, let's take this into a space where we can then recognise, had this been a direct physical attack on the MOD main building, there absolutely would have been calls for some form of proportionate retaliation, perhaps sanctions, other nations joining in. But because it's in this spurious world that we can't really see, we don't know really how to respond. I give an example. Back in 2014, North Korea launched a massive cyber attack on Sony Studios in Los Angeles. Why? Because the North Korean president there, Kim Jong-un, took offense to a very humorous but rather rude film with Seth Rogen called The Interview. And study students didn't know what was going on for some time. They called in the FBI, the CIA, and they said, you've actually been subject to this massive cyber attack because the president took offense. This was taken to the White House, decisions were made, and I understand, though it can never be confirmed, that America then responded with a massive cyber attack of their own onto North Korea. Now, that bypassed Congress completely. It bypassed, the U.S. Capitol in its debate, in its discussion, confirmation that this is how we should, America should respond. So, as I say, this unearths all sorts of questions, not just of our own resilience, how we defend ourselves from this happening in the future, but what is a proportionate response?
Yep. You've got to hope that Beijing isn't watching ITVX too closely, because Red Eye doesn't portray China in a very good way at all. I mean, we're laughing about it, but actually, when you tell us that story, and I've completely forgotten about the interview, the motivation for an attack can be so spurious and, thin-skinned, really. Do you believe that we do have at our disposal the right kind of minds in this country to be planning that kind of protection for us that you're talking about?
Yes, and I can speak as somebody that worked in the Foreign Office and indeed the MOD as a minister. We have some of the state-of-the-art capabilities in this area, both on offensive and defensive. Where perhaps we then are more vulnerable is, as I implied earlier, is the third parties, is the other contractors, is the commercial sector. That, of course, all parts of Whitehall need to rely on. And that's where perhaps we need to upgrade. And I'm sure we'll hear that from the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, who I have to say is one of the more tech-savvy Secretaries of State that we have in the Cabinet at the moment. He and Oliver Dowden, who was responsible for overall cybersecurity for government, will be looking at this very seriously indeed.
Who's the least tech-savvy person in the Cabinet at the moment?
Now you're asking me a question there. Well, actually, you could text them all and see who replies back the fastest. That might give you an indication.
Let's do it. Oh, what a challenge. Thank you very much indeed. We appreciate your time. It's Tobias Ellwood, who speaks from experience, the former chair of the House of Commons Defence Select Committee.
I have staggered on to episode 3 of Red Eye. I'm going to see it through, Fee.
Be very careful.
Is it worth it?
No.
Okay.
The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has confirmed the name of the contractor running the Ministry of Defence's payroll system that was hacked by China. Shapps told Parliament that SSCL, Shared Services Connected Limited, is the contractor, and their work is being reviewed across government following the cyber attack. China has denied their part in it. He explained how the government has responded to the attack.
We've immediately taken the system offline, and this has secured it against similar future threats. Secondly, we've launched a full investigation, drawing on Cabinet Office support and specialist external expertise to examine the potential failings of the contractor and to minimise the risk of similar incidents in the future. 3, whilst our initial investigations have found no evidence that any data has been removed, as a precaution, we have today alerted those service personnel affected through the chain of command. In addition, we're also sending out letters to a small number of veterans who've retired and who may have been affected as an additional precaution. The House will wish to note the vast majority of the UK veterans community are, however, unaffected.
That was Grant Shapps speaking a little earlier. Katie Stallard is Senior Editor of China and Global Affairs at the New Statesman and joins us now on the evening edition. Hi, Katie.
Hi, good to be with you.
Good to be with you as well. Good for you for joining us is what I meant to say. All the words are the wrong way round this evening. I'm dizzy off our silver win at the Arias. Now, Katie, we're told that names, addresses and bank details of current Army, Royal Navy and RAF personnel were exposed by this hack that we are understanding more about as the hours go by. I think the question might be how much of a threat is this? What might China do with this information if it is indeed China who are behind this?
Yeah, I think it's important to say a couple of things at the outset. And I realise for people who may be personally caught up in this will not be tremendously reassuring at this moment. But the first is that the language that's being used here is that this data has been exposed. There's no evidence as yet that the data has actually been stolen, been taken, been used in any way. So it is that data was available to this malign actor, as it's being described, but China, as is widely being reported. But the second point is that attribution itself may well not come in a concrete form for months, perhaps years. It's only just this March that China was formally accused of involvement in the 2021 hack of the Electoral Commission data. So getting to the sort of formal concrete details of this may take some time. But I think the bigger issue and the significance, beyond the individuals who are caught up in this personally, is how this could then change the conversation around China in the UK. I think the parallel I would draw is with the Chinese spy balloon incident in the US last year, where I'm normally based, and how that really made concrete for a lot of people individually and a lot of lawmakers what has at times seems like a sort of abstract sense of a China threat. This really made it concrete. People could see the live coverage of this balloon traveling over these very sensitive sites on their TVs. Some people could just look up and see it there, and it really made this a concrete issue that lawmakers were angry about, that they wanted to be seen to be taking action on behalf of their constituents. I think we may well see that same dynamic here now in the UK, where so many MPs will have constituents who are either caught up in this or who are concerned that they could be, and they will want to see action being taken. They will want to see a stronger stance and a clearer sense of the approach to China from the government. So I think the politics of this may well be more significant than the actual direct implications of the attack itself.
Interesting. And look, it feels like not a month goes by where there's not another story with concerns about China, security concerns, hacking concerns, fears for our security here, I suppose. Just on this particular issue, just to sort of round up, aside from the political implications, do we know if military personnel are being alerted or moved, or because there's no immediate threat, is this one just sort of sitting here for now? I just wonder whether there's been any discussion about that, because this does also affect some MPs as well, doesn't it, who are reservists in the army?
Yeah, this may well be MPs themselves who are being informed today that their data may have been exposed. So I think this again just makes personal and makes real this sense of a threat from China. And I think it really empowers, I think there's long been these really two constituencies in the China conversation, the sort of economic minded folks who see the great potential of the China market, who really look at China with pound signs in their eyes, and then people who are really much more concerned about the national security implications of the relationship and want to see the government take a much more hardline and clear-eyed approach. I think this really empowers that side of the conversation, and it makes real this sense of a national security threat. It also is worth saying the timing of this could not be worse from China's perspective. Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, is right now in France at the start of a tour of Europe, the purpose of which has been to try to avert a trade war and to try to continue to push to what China really wants to do is to try to drive a bit of a wedge between the US and Europe, and to try to show that China is a responsible partner. It can be a lucrative, valuable trade partner, and it is a responsible stakeholder in the world. This news breaking right as Xi Jinping lands in France and potentially involving a French company really undermines that core message that China can be trusted. This is a very clear illustration of the fears and the people on the other side of that argument who say, look, this is why China can't be trusted. This is why we need to see China first and foremost through a national security lens.
Look, super interesting. Thank you for offering us that context, and really important here. I guess we might hear publicly, or there would be plenty of work behind the scenes in terms of how Rishi Sunak approaches this politically. And as you said, that's probably one of the strongest threads to this story at the moment. Katie Stallard, thanks so much for speaking to us, Senior Editor of China and Global Affairs at the New Statesman. Thanks for being on.